party told you to reject the evidence of your ears and eyes. It was their final, most essential command. This is a line from George Orwell's novel 1984. Why am I mentioning it today? On Monday this week, this being the 20th of February, CPCB shared a report with the National Green Tribunal in India that during the ongoing Mahakumbh, the waters of Prayagraj failed the basic test of being merely bathable thanks to an enthusiastic overdose of fecal coliform. Now, for the uninitiated, fecal coliform is the polite scientific term for your neighbor's digestive afterthoughts, or as some would call it, Tatti. And its permissible limit in bathing water is 2500 units per 100 ml, according to the CPCB, Central Pollution Control Board. The Ganga, though, it seems, is feeling generous by a few times than that. A bench comprising of NGT chairperson Justice Prakash Srivastav, Sudhir Agrawal, A. Senthil, convened to discuss what could be done to stop this ancient Indian tradition of sewage discharge into sacred rivers. CPCB, in its February 3rd report, observed that not a single monitored location in Prayagraj consistently met the required water quality standards. The report, with the kind of deadpan obviously usually reserved for weather updates, I guess, noted as millions bathe in the river, fecal levels rises. Hello cause, meat effect. Meanwhile, and in a turn of events, surprising to absolutely no one, Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, Cutie Pie, dismissed the report outright, claiming that not only was the Sangam's water fit for bathing, but one could also pour themselves a refreshing glass if they so wished. His unwavering faith in divinely filtered river water was, of course, echoed by India's many news organizations, which diligently reported both the scientific findings and the political denial, without any pesky inconvenience of analysis. And for the ever-vocal online BJP supporters, utter silence. No memes, no outrage, no rebuttals, not even a WhatsApp forward claiming fecal coliform boosts immunity. The truth is, and you know and I know and everybody knows, that a casual glance at the water anywhere, especially the Ganga that flows through UP, Bihar into Bengal, is that there is less water in the fecal and more fecal in the water. But, as I said, the party told you to reject the evidence of your ears and eyes, and it was their final and most essential command. The question is, why does no one care? Why does no one care when our AQI is whatever it is, when our water is like how it is, when there is massive levels of malnourishment, when, well, China has villages in Arunachal Pradesh. Why does no one care? And that's our deep dive for today. See, we grasp truth in one of two ways. Either through our own senses, it's raining because we are drenched, or through a supposedly neutral expert. An astrophysicist assures us the Earth is indeed moving, despite our insistence that it feels quite stationary. For matters beyond our direct experience, we rely on arbiters of truth, specialists who tell us what's real. When it comes to our political reality and social reality, the arbiter of truth has long been the media. Most of us have accepted journalists as specialists who can tell us what is true and what is not. The interesting thing is that this tendency is still very strong in India. While trust in the media has shrunk globally, it has stayed the same and even increased slightly in this country. This is from a Pew report from 2 years ago. So how fair of an arbiter of truth is the trusted Indian media? Aaj Tak is the most watched TV news channel in the country, followed by ABP News, Z News, India TV and Republic Bharat in Hindi. The Hindi daily is Dainik Jagran, which is the most read. And now I challenge you to pick any one of them or tune into any one of them and see at any given moment, if they are not peddling falsehoods, they amplify certain truths more than the others. Partly this is because of the nature of how today's media is. Jon Stewart from The Daily Show once said it really eloquently. The 24-hour news networks are built for one thing, and that is 9/11. Something like 9/11. Since actual crises are very rare, they have to conjure urgency out of thin air. And if urgency demands conflict, who better to embody it than our current political leadership? Now, I will pause here for a minute because some of you might be thinking that fecal matter in Ganga or AQI is also probably as urgent as any news bit. And that is true. But the way these news channels and these newspapers are set up is also, comes into effect, where they rely on a lot of money being given to them by the government. And a lot of money being given to them by the advertisers who are not government. Government wants it to not show certain news. Now, if that money that the government is providing them is offset by the private corporate, then they will still be largely independent. But the thing is that in India, the current setup is like this, where there is very little difference between the government and the private corporate houses that have the money. And frankly, the people who watch these news and what they want to hear as well. When was the last time that you saw an ad for urea or some farming equipment in Republic Bharat? That's not what it is for. And if the advertisement has to be about a shampoo or a bank, if you look up the chain, you'll realize that the leadership, given political or business, is basically the same, which is subject for another day, but something that should worry us. Anyhow, no one has capitalized more on Indian media's abdication of truth-telling than our Prime Minister. His dominance on social media is not a fluke. It's a reflection of his mass appeal. But here's the catch. Having the majority on your side does not mean you have the truth on your side. And so, in a media landscape driven by ratings and social sphere fueled by retweets and a political ecosystem dictated by elections, all screaming for validation because they have numbers to flaunt, truth finds itself an unwelcome guest. It's the first casualty in a world where volume trumps veracity and the crowd, as always, cheers for the loudest voice. In a world where truth is an afterthought and every half-baked idea is a visionary policy, every rhetorical flourish a stroke of genius, outlandish claims like GPS chips in currency, black money vanishing overnight, come and go like monsoon clouds. It drenches the gullible before evaporating into oblivion. It's a world where parroting even objective falsehoods does not deny one's credibility. Sudhir Chaudhary and Shweta Singh are still celebrated. The Prime Minister is still the Prime Minister, and there is still no 15 lakh in your bank account or a GPS in your notes. Meanwhile, the BJP, which is the self-declared guardian of national security, watches as a hostile neighbor, China, strolls into Indian territory, sets up camp, helps itself to our land, and somehow still BJP remains the party of national security. Since Modi's 2014 ascent, and especially post 2016 after demonetization, his supporters have displayed an almost supernatural ability to believe and spread fiction with unwavering confidence. And because of that, a vast section of the country exists in a parallel reality. This reality where facts are optional and questioning the script is blasphemy. This is not new. This has happened in other countries as well. This is happening in the US right now. This has happened in Italy in the 1920s and 30s. Once you make people question the media, then anything that they say can be questioned, right? So take the Balakot airstrike, for example. The international press, to this day, refused to validate the government's triumphant narrative that it went into the Pakistani territory and did XYZ. The response, Modi supporters promptly labeled them closet Islamists because in this version of reality, skepticism equals sedition and blind faith is our national sport. Hannah Arendt writes in The Origins of Totalitarianism, in an ever-changing, incomprehensible world, the masses had reached the point where they would, at same time, believe everything and nothing, think that everything was possible and that nothing was true. She wrote that mass propaganda discovered that its audience was ready at all times to believe the worst, no matter how absurd, and did not particularly object to being deceived because it held every statement to be a lie anyhow. One could make people believe the most fantastic statements one day and trust that if the next day they were given irrefutable proof of their falsehood, they would take refuge in that same cynicism. They would not desert the leader who had lied to them. They would protest that they had known all along that the statement was a lie and would admire the leader for their superior tactical cleverness. Again, very visible with Trump, Modi, and Yogi more and more. When China supposedly came into the Galwan Valley, it was a fascinating case of political creativity. It's a fascinating study. Because for the longest time, the government insisted that there was no incursion at all. Even after Indian soldiers were killed, Modi went on national television and assured the country that in fact nothing had happened. The Chinese media gradually took notes. And then the boldest countermeasure of this government was banning 59 Chinese apps. And once that happened, everyone forgot that for the longest time Modi claimed that nothing had happened. And suddenly Arnab Goswami was shouting from his TV about the digital airstrike. What was the need of the digital airstrike if nothing had happened? Now a rational observer might call this response laughably inadequate or not needed if you were telling the truth in the first place. But Modi supporters, the loyal chorus, have hailed it as masterstroke, applauded him on social media, in legacy media, and presumably many group chats. To understand how this works, we must recognize two key rhetorical strategies: the winding diatribe and the thought-terminating cliche. The winding diatribe is when someone speaks at length, sounds wise and appears to be making a point, like I am doing right now, without actually doing so. Am I doing it or not? You be the judge. But Modi excels at this. Remember the speech that he gave during the COVID pandemic about like lighting diyas and candles and all that? There's a, and I'm quoting him, there's a line in his speech. At that time, if you have turned off all the lights of your home and each one of us in all direction has lit a diya, we will experience the superpower of light, clearly illuminating the common purpose we are all fighting for. Perfectly grammatical, but entirely meaningless. I mean, other seasoned professionals in this art is Chucky, Vasudev, Sri Ravi Shankar, Deepak Chopra. People who have built careers out of making gibberish sound profound. Just find any speech, any talk, any quote attributed to them and you will realize that it's just just woo-woo. There's nothing, there's no meaning. But it comes from a place of power. When someone is sitting behind the Prime Minister's desk, or in case of like these gurus sitting in the middle of this massive crowd, we have a tendency to take anything that they say to be profound. Another great example of this is when we attend a stand-up comedy show. And even if the comic is not funny, you'll realize that you'll laugh more at the same jokes that you'll probably not laugh at as much if you were like watching the jokes happen from your home, because you've made a psychological trade. And then comes the thought terminating cliche. This is not an argument, it's a verbal off switch. Consider a line like, हमारे जवान सीमा पे हमारे जवान लड़ रहे हैं, and XYZ to after it. हमारे सीमा पे हमारे जवान लड़ रहे हैं और तुम्हें पेट्रोल प्राइसेस की पड़ गई है, सीमा पे हमारे जवान लड़ रहे हैं और तुम्हें डिमोनेटाइजेशन की पड़ी है, या सीमा पे गलवान में हमारे जवान खड़े हैं, या सियाचिन में हमारे जवान खड़े हैं और तुम यहाँ लाइन में नहीं खड़े हो सकते. The point is not to prove anything. It is to make you stop thinking. Once deployed, the conversation is over. Logic is damned. And that, in essence, is how Modi's supporters justify a foreign policy response that would be considered underwhelming even at a school debate. If you can't counter China, at least you can uninstall TikTok and feel victorious. Both the winding diatribe and the thought-terminating cliche thrive on what psychologists call peripheral route processing, PRP. In simpler terms, it means that the actual content of an argument is irrelevant. What matters is how convincingly it's delivered. A policy like demonetization might seem questionable, but when announced in the grand setting of the Prime Minister's national address, secondary factors, his tone of authority, the intimidating weight of his office, lend it an air of legitimacy. This is the same reason a celebrity endorsement makes a brand instantly more valuable, regardless of whether the celebrity has ever used the product. Another classic tool in this game is argument ab octoriate, the argument from authority. Indian television news channels have mastered this. Need expert insight on a pandemic? We will have Kapil Dev, a cricketing legend with precisely zero medical credentials, come in and talk about it. Want to assess India's military strength against China? We will have this Shiv Shankar guy who does not even know his own guests on the show. And they will talk about things like China's one-child policy, because apparently having fewer siblings means weaker soldiers. Literally, this is what they discussed. They discussed India and China's parity, and they said because China forces families to have one child, that one child grows up to be weaker. There is, for the last 10 years, Indians are on average growing shorter, and Chinese have gained like 6 centimeters of height on average. But once a critical mass of believers is reached, once enough people nod along to the diatribe or uncritically accept the thought-terminating cliche, its truth is no longer up for debate. The sheer volume of agreement, amplified by the structural power of media and online echo chambers, ensures that any dissenting voice is drowned out, dismissed, or simply outstreamed. The genius in all this is that the more absurd the claim becomes, the louder it gets repeated and the truer it begins to feel. That's why the GPS note thing sticks so much, because I do not know if you guys remember that period, because we all go through this state of amnesia, but we were supposed to like believe in it. Everyone was talking about it, or in the early COVID, everyone was talking about how India will not be affected by COVID because we drink haldi doodh or something. And even now, the government has not accepted that India ever reached community transmission level. Even now, the government has not given us back data about like how much money was returned back to the RBI after demonetization. But unfortunately, this is like we have become a republic with amnesia. So in this ecosystem, where the same narrative is echoed across multiple sources, news channels, social media, WhatsApp family groups, agreement is rewarded with social currency, while dissent is treated as betrayal. You must have noticed this, especially in the WhatsApp groups. When you say something which is not agreeable to the current government, the group, no matter what, will come to you and say that please let's keep it apolitical. But anything pro-government is posted willy-nilly, because now we have reached that stage where talking about Modi, BJP, and the current government and the things they do is so part of our DNA that does not seem political. Only criticizing them seems political. The leader is not just a politician, but a messianic figure. And opposing him is equated with opposing the nation, morality, and righteousness itself. This is why Sudhir and Arnab will continue their performances, and why Modi will keep winning unless something truly unforeseeable disrupts the cycle. A significant section of the Indian population now exhibits the hallmarks of a fascist cult. And I do not say this lightly. Umberto Eco, in his essay on fascism, pointed out that while some of these traits do not necessarily form a rigid ideology, even the presence of a few is enough for fascism to congeal around them. What are these? The cult of tradition, a fusion of mythic past nostalgia with and a rejection of modernity as outsiders, as an idea from outsiders. The cult of action for action's sake, glorification of action devoid of intellectual reflection, reinforcing anti-intellectualism and hostility towards science and reason. Fecal matter, demonetization, all of these either show hostility towards science and reason, or are action for action's sake. Disagreement is treason. Intellectual discourse is dismissed as a hindrance to action, and critical thinking is demonized. हार्वर्ड वालों की सोच क्या होती है और हार्वर्ड वालों की सोच क्या होती है, फॉर एग्जाम्पल. Fear of difference, exploiting xenophobia, casteism, and religious divide to consolidate power. कपड़ों से पता चल जाता है वो कौन है. Appeal to a frustrated middle class, stoking fears of economic displacement and social insecurity. वो भारी हो जाएंगी. एक है तो सेफ है. Population, fear of like Muslims becoming the majority in 2050 and all of that. Obsession with the plot and the hype of an enemy threat, constructing an internal or external enemy, Muslims, urban Naxals, anti-nationals, to justify oppression. Pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. The nation is always at war, whether with external foes or traitors within. Contempt for the weak. The strong must triumph. The vulnerable are burdens to be discarded. Newspeak. Language is distorted to limit critical thought, with words like secularism twisted beyond recognition. You will now see news anchors using the term secularism or liberal as if they have some negative meaning. So like someone, if someone has to say that they are in their minds that they are siding with Islamic terrorists, radical terrorists, they'll say they are secular. That's not what secular means, but now that word has come to mean that. And finally, spread of propaganda and lies. Nanochip in currency notes, economic benefits of demonetization, Galvani airstrike, unfortunately. Umberto Eco said, a few of these points together signify the rise of fascism. And in case of India, I think all of these exist to a level. So I don't know what it says about India. In such a system, facts and data lose relevance because the very foundation of truth itself has been altered. And that is why you can see that poop, fecal floating in the river, and even then your chief minister can come and say that the river water can be, drinkable, पिए सकते हैं, वो fit to drink. This shift began when religion was tied to the party, then religion to the nation, and then the party became synonymous with national security and integrity. The truth was molded to serve political ends, whether by rewriting history books or pandering to the insecurities of the majority. Now, those who wield social and cultural power, particularly the upper caste Hindus in India, identify with the party on an emotional level. The soaring viewership of jingoistic news channels, the film as propaganda, only reinforces this emotional bond. The party has mastered control over the people's emotional triggers, and rational arguments, however sound, cannot override deeply conditioned emotional convictions. To counter this, logic alone will not suffice. There is no data that you can provide them to convince them. Emotional narratives must be crafted to disrupt emotional sentiments. Until that happens, all dissenting voices will continue to be drowned by this deafening roar of newspeak.